Hello, and welcome to a presentation entitled Building Dialogue Between Science and Religion. In the previous video, I described the origins of the word dialogue as coming from the Greek for words or knowledge that build across some sort of gap or divide. In our case, this gap is a difference in beliefs or worldviews concerning God and evolution. So how do you start to build a bridge where none exists? Well, for today's presentation, I want to focus on a possible way forwards that builds from our ability to apply the word belief to each of these ideas. Though some are wary of using the word belief when referring to science, this is a topic we'll come back to later in the course, and for now I want to go no deeper than the Oxford English Dictionary definition that to believe is to accept that something is true. In that sense, both God and evolution share the property that whatever evidence exists, people can exercise the right to choose whether or not to accept each concept as true. Now, in today's world, it may appear that there are many different ways in which we come to know things. Put another way, human knowledge can appear as a bewildering diversity of fragments. For example, structures of human thinking about God form a body of ideas known as theology, whereas evolution is an idea that belongs within biology, and biology itself belongs within the broader class of ideas known as science. But if we travel back far enough into the history of the civilization from which such words developed, then we find that all formalized or systematic rational thought shares a common root in the single class of ideas known as philosophy. In fact, until comparatively recently, what we know today as science went by the different term natural philosophy, or philosophy about nature. Thus, Isaac Newton wrote his ideas about gravity and motion within a foundational text for modern physics, which often goes by the shortened name of Principia Mathematica, but its full title is Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, which is Latin for Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. One legacy of this background that we can still find today is that the title PhD, awarded for a doctoral dissertation in any field of research, is short for Doctor of Philosophy, and in that sense, what appears today as isolated fragments can be seen as branches of knowledge that have grown out from this central trunk. We have simply developed different names for subsystems of thought, wherever enough knowledge has accumulated to make this a practical necessity. Thus, systematic rational knowledge began as an inclusive whole, leading to the question, what exactly is philosophy? Once again, etymology, or the study of word origins, helps to clarify. Philosophy comes from the Greek words philo, meaning love, as in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, and Sophia, meaning wisdom, a meaning still hinted at in such modern words as sophisticated. In other words, a philosopher is one who practices the love of wisdom. In this context, Plato, one of the most famous philosophers of ancient Greece, wrote an allegory that pictured humanity like prisoners, chained together facing the rocky wall at the back of a cave. A fire near the mouth of the cave throws shadows onto the wall within their field of vision, and they mistake these flickering shadows for reality, until one of them is freed to emerge from the cave into a world of three-dimensional objects, colours, and steady, clear light. Having once experienced this reality, the freed prisoner returns to those still in chains, and attempts to describe to them the world outside. To Plato, the love of wisdom is a key that frees us from the chains of ignorance. The philosopher is thus the free prisoner, and having seen further into the true nature of things, the philosopher's duty is to impart this insight to those who remain captive in the shadowlands. But Plato was not the first of the Greek philosophers. That distinction goes to a group known today as the pre-Socratics. They connected through a shared focus on a single underlying paradox of the one and the many, that the world we perceive appears to comprise an endless diversity of different things. Worse still, these things themselves seem to be in a constant state of change. What then is our stable basis for perceiving this change? Where can we find an underlying truth that transcends this shifting reality? What does it mean to say that a golden ring and a golden coin are made of the same thing? If every peal of thunder is different, then how do we know that they are thunder? Is my love for my wife the same as her love for me? And who or what is the I that is doing all of this perceiving anyway? One thinker, Heraclitus, gave a famous description of this problem with his statement, "No man can cross the same river twice." His point was that both the river and the man are changing from moment to moment. So what gives us the confident intuition that something called a river and something called a man really exist from one instant to the next. Some pre-Socratic thinkers derived purely physical material explanations. For example, one extraordinarily prescient idea came from Leucippus and his pupil Democritus, who proposed that beneath the appearance of changing entities that we perceive, there might exist smaller, unchanging building blocks from which everything is constructed. Thus they invented the word atom, meaning that which cannot be divided, more than 2,000 years before modern science derived the same idea from empirical evidence. Most pre-Socratics, however, argued that there had to be something more, something deeper, to a full and satisfying explanation. Today we can perhaps understand this point by focusing on your own changing body. In as little as a decade, the physical basis of what makes you, you, has completely changed. The cells in your body and the atoms that form those cells are themselves in a constant state of turnover. So what exactly is the unchanging you that you perceive? To a modern ear, this sort of philosophy starts to cross between science or reason and a more theological type of cosmology. But to the pre-Socratics this distinction was neither necessary nor helpful. Almost by definition, that which was eternally true was of God. This was not the sort of humanoid God of Greek mythology, flawed by the jealousies and emotions of Mount Olympus, but a search for an ultimate truth that could be glimpsed only through careful and creative human inquiry. Another pre-Socratic, Xenophanes, expressed the difference in the wry comment that the Ethiopians say that their gods are flat-nosed and black, while the Thracians say that theirs have blue eyes and red hair. Yet if cattle or horses had hands and could draw, then horses would draw their god like horses, and cattle like cattle. And whether you believe in God or not, I would ask you to take a moment right now to ask what image comes to mind when I say the word God. And what does that image have to say about the extent to which you have thought through the concept? Meanwhile, back to the pre-Socratic philosophers, we find that although explanations varied on how to develop a deeper understanding of ultimate truth, most of them came to focus on some sort of organizing principle. Anaxagoras, for example, referred to nous, or mind, as an underlying principle that organized material building blocks into their fleeting permutations. Heraclitus had rather mysteriously used the Greek word logos for a similar idea. Now I have already mentioned that logos is typically translated into English as word. But already by the time of Heraclitus, logos had a multitude of overlapping meanings that helped to explain his choice, and other pre-Socratic thinkers were happy to explore and extend these nuances. Logos could mean plan or formula. It could mean reason or rational thought. It could even mean ratio or numerical relationship. Thus another famous pre-Socratic thinker, Pythagoras, founded one of several groups who focused on numbers as the key to the mystery. To Pythagoreans, ultimate truth was to be found by probing the underlying mathematics that describes the world around us, particularly the relationships between seemingly different entities. So when we learn at elementary school the Pythagorean formula for calculating the length of the hypotenuse in a right-angled triangle, what we do not learn is the profound cosmological significance that this universal, unchanging relationship carried for those who discovered it. But this emerging idea of oneness as a foundation for understanding our world is not limited to the Greeks or to philosophy. Before and after the time of the pre-Socratics, parallel themes were developing within other cultures. In particular, many cultures had built collections of gods to represent the diverse phenomena that seemed to require such explanations. Gods of the sun, gods of love, gods of thunder, and so on. Often the collections that emerged reflected the assimilation of different mythologies into a single framework, as people and cultures mixed within the ancient world. But within such cultures were often hints of theologies that had started to probe similar questions to the Greeks. Is it possible that all these entities are merely manifestations of one greater god? For example, the ancient Egyptians had a multitude of different humanoid gods, such as Ra, the god of the sun, and Anubis, the god of the dead. But at least some lines of scholarship view this as a misrepresentation. Thus the Tahuti Foundation, that promotes research into ancient Egypt and into a contemporary version of their spirituality, writes that the term gods is a misrepresentation of the Egyptian term Niteru. The ancient Egyptians believed in one God, who was immortal, invisible, eternal, omniscient, almighty. It is the functions and attributes of his domain that were called an Niteru. And of course the concept of God as one ultimate source of binding truth became a cornerstone, first of Judaism, and then of the Christianity and eventually Islam that grew out of it. Loosely speaking, These ideas of a single underlying truth are versions of what modern philosophers know as monism, the view that unity exists within a field of inquiry where this was perhaps not to be expected. All of which brings us back to the start point of this presentation, to ask you whether your beliefs are centered in one or more fundamental approaches to understanding the world. Specifically, the question that I would ask you to ponder and then write about before the next presentation is this. When you describe your belief or lack of belief in God, and your belief or lack of belief in evolution, do you mean the same thing by the word belief? Or, put another way, do you perceive that one unifying truth connects all things, such that a single approach can adequately describe the line or lines of inquiry that have led you to these beliefs? Once again, I would challenge you to keep your final written answers short, 250 words or less. But for now, you'll have to trust me that this will not only help with discussion, it will also be important later on as I ask you to examine what you have written and to assemble it into a more complete credo.